Dad Speak podcast. This is Jaxon, Robert, Stevan, Freeborn. The podcast made by dads, but not exclusively for dads. So
I love that tagline.
it felt so official. It felt good.
I love that, man. Say it one more time. You gotta say it one more time. Don't laugh, man. This is serious shit.
There's so much pressure. No, this is the Dad Speak podcast. This is Jaxon, Robert, Stevan, Freeborn. This is a podcast made by dads, but not exclusively for dads.
Yeah, see, now we need to get like a sound bite, and then we need to get some animation, and then we're gonna have like a video intro with that playing over the top
Have
of
the
it.
John Cena theme come in. Love it.
I saw this funny Facebook video where it was like every day when this kid joins his college Zoom classes, before he turns on his video, he plays like a wrestling intro, like the Undertaker song or John Cena. Yeah. And then as soon as it ends,
that's how it would be. I would show up like in Randy Macho Man, like feathered boas and stuff like that. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's the best, man.
It'd be a production. So, how are you doing, bud?
How am I doing?
How are you doing?
Man, it caught me so off guard because it's like the first time anyone's asked me that. You know? No one ever asked Stevan how he's doing. Nobody. You know, these little savages I live with, they want popsicles and chocolate milk. That's like all they care about.
Go-Grts. That's the go-to at the Roberts house is Go-Grts.
No, I'm good, man. Life's good. Everyone's healthy. Cal's pretty much healed up and over his tonsillectomy thing.
That's good.
Still waiting on the anesthesia bill, though. So I have a feeling there's a grand or more coming out of my pocket very soon. But yeah, work's good. You know, I started that new job like a little over a month and a half ago, and that's going really well. I got some exciting kind of like, I guess, side hustle work. The company that I was working for before I made the job change hired me to make them a video for some kind of competition that they would normally present like a PowerPoint for it, but instead this year they have to submit what they asked for was a video of them doing the presentation. And so the guys that I used to work with thought it would be a lot cooler as if instead of just being 12 minutes of people talking in front of a PowerPoint slide, that they like overlay on top of them talking, overlay like images of film of Joplin, the plant, the employees, you know, so they hired me to come in and shoot that footage and stuff. So it's a little extra money on the side and, getting to do something fun. So that's kind of cool.
I love it. It's awesome, man.
What about you? You know, I want to be reciprocal. How's things in Jaxon Roberts' world?
It's good. Work is tough. It's a rough year to be a teacher.
What does it look like?
So, at our high school, we're doing A-Day, B-Days. It's 2,000 kid high school. So half the kids are coming on A-Days and half the kids are coming on B-Days. And they just switch back and forth.
So what do they do? So when they're not there, are they supposed to be doing stuff, or is it just like that's your off day?
It's what they're supposed to be doing. Is we're pretty much everybody's gone all online with like posting assignments and tests and everything. So they're supposed to be working on their off days, and some kids do. The vast majority are not.
That's unfortunate.
I can't say I blame them though, because I remember, dude, if we were in high school and we got every other day off, there's no way.
Oh yeah. Well, it would depend. So I will caveat that by saying that it would totally depend on how hard ass the teachers were being about the work actually getting done. Because if I had work that I was supposed to be doing on my B days, like say I go to school on A day, I would have been the kid that like, I'll do the work on the B day, but I'm probably not doing it from 8 to 3. Like I'm probably squeezing it in the last 2 hours of the day, or like the morning of the A day, the next A day or something. Like I'm still going to get it done because I don't want to get yelled at by my parents because my grades are shit. But I'm probably not following the exactly outlined structure.
See, that's the difference between you and me. Is that all sounds really great, and I would love to believe I was that student in high school. Not the case.
Jack's like, fuck it, B-Days, let's go.
Dude, it's so funny, like talking to kids who like had bad grades or haven't turned stuff in, because I'm like, hey, listen, and I'm like, I know why you're not doing this, because here's why I didn't do it. And I was like,
I empathize with you.
And I tell them, I was like, so this is why I didn't do stuff in high school. And they're like, yeah, that's exactly it. I was like, I know. I was like, if you work hard, this is where you can get.
Dude, my wife, she gets so pissed at me because, like, I mean, in high school, like, I felt like I was by all normal standard definitions, an upstanding student. Like, I went to class on time, very rarely skipped school, followed the rules, did good, got good grades, took the AC. Like, I did like all the check boxes that you're supposed to check, right? To quote, be successful or go on to be successful. And then, like, I got into college, and I remember my second or third semester in college, I had an organic chemistry class with a girl who I had like my sophomore year of high school. She was in my history class with Miss Robinson Gray. And she didn't do anything. She had horrible, I think she dropped out, and I think she took her GED. But there we are sitting, like, and by all means, kudos to her. Like, that's awesome. Like, that takes effort too. Her path took effort as well. But I just remember sitting there and thinking to myself, none of that shit really mattered. And I just remember how serious everything was to me when I was like 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, and how, because I took things so seriously, I probably missed out on a lot of the freedom and the joy of being a adolescent teenager, right?
Yeah.
Like that, trying to be too responsible for my age. And like, I know most people would think like that's not a thing you can do, but I kind of feel like it happens. Yeah, like I kind of feel like I guess that's like for my boys, like I want them to kind of like, I want them to do the right thing. I want them to do, you know, what's best for them. But I also I want to help them understand that like it's all going to work out in the wash. So don't like over worry or concern yourselves with every detail, right? Like
I call it the Gilmore Girl balance.
Yeah,
so I'm about to lose my man card here, but
one of my use the Gilmore Girl reference.
Oh, dude. No, you know what? No shame. Gilmore Girls is a great show.
I'm gonna own it, man. I'm just gonna own it.
That's what I'm doing right now. We watch it all the time, but it's that balance of, you know, it's okay to study your ass off, but it's also okay to have days where you kind of veg out. And I'm kind of okay, you know, my daughters, I want them to be serious, but not all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's why that is unfortunate probably in our education system is we have people in our education system that literally went high school, college, whoop, right back into the education system. And so their perspective is like, it's so like, you know what I mean? Like it feels so like everything to them feels so important because that's the only world they've existed in and succeeded in. And when you get out into the real world and you're kind of like, yeah, the real world doesn't really care about a lot of that stuff. You know, like I remember like the one thing teachers would always say is like, you need to learn to be on time because when you get a job, you're going to be expected to be on time. Look, I worked in the corporate world for 5 years and every fucking meeting started late. Every one, right? And it wasn't, yeah, and it wasn't just like the low level nonchalant employee. It's like the manager, the general manager, like people just like routinely show up late and they always have an excuse. They're always like, oh, I was getting off another call, or, oh, I got caught up talking. And like, and everyone's cool with it. Like everyone is completely fine with it. Like some of that stuff, I'm like, you guys obviously were giving out advice and you had never actually experienced what a real job in a corporate world setting is. It's just, it
That's
doesn't
like
line up.
my go-to is I was conferencing with another teacher about a student. Never have I ever. Oh man.
Yeah,
No,
that's awesome, dude. Though I'm glad though that there are teachers like you that do have that perspective, right? Because you are trying to do important things, you are trying to educate young people and things, but having that perspective of like, yeah, it's like it's high school and you've got a free day away from the school. Like you're probably not gonna waste it spinning your wheels in a history textbook, or something like that.
It's kind of what you were talking about, going straight from high school, college, back to school, and that's what I did. But I think, and this is kind of a nice foreshadowing for what we talked about earlier, I took such a roundabout way to get there.
Yeah, and like I think you're not giving yourself enough credit because, like,
I got a taste of the real world before I graduated. So
yeah, and there's nothing like that. That's just there's nothing like education, being a teacher, being a coach, that is a skill set. We should train people and teach them that skill set so that they can go be the best educators they can be whatsoever. But it's when you lose that perspective, right? It's like when maybe you haven't had a normal job, right? Or you haven't, like, maybe you didn't work through college, or you didn't experience some of the normal day-to-day stressors that people would experience just holding like a 9-to-5, 8-to-5 gig, or even work in an industry that maybe your students might be interested in going into. Like I know that's one thing that, like, kind of looking at something maybe I would want to one day do, like for like kids in the public education system, is do some kind of like series of industry talks where we bring in a food scientist, we bring in an organic chemist, we bring in a buyer for Sherwin-Williams Paint Company. And so that kids can get exposed to, like, that we think in such narrow terms of like history, psychology, biology. And like, it's hard for kids unless they're thinking in like the traditional roles of lawyer, doctor, accountant. It's really hard for them to understand, like, okay, well, if I go to college and get a business degree, what next, right? And it's really helpful to kind of bring people in that can offer, like, here's what I do every day. Here's what my pay scale is, right? Here's what my corporate office job is like, or like there was guys that would come to the plant that worked for Rottler Pest Control, and they were like certified entomologists who, like, went to school for biology and stuff and went to work for these pest control companies. And they, like, are experts in knowing how to manage pests at plants and stuff. Like, that's like a career field no one, like, talks to you about, right?
No.
But it's kind of a cool career field because they don't have to go to the office every day. They get to drive around in their company provided truck. They get company provided cell phones, benefits. Like, it's kind of a cool thing. They get to consult with clients and come up with solutions, and you get to apply science and biology and all that stuff. And I don't know. It's just that would be something that, like, I would be interested in the future, because I feel like that was something when I was in school, it was just so narrow. The band of, like, what your future was going to be was just so tiny, and
it's one of the reasons I really love teaching history, is because the way I was always taught history, and the way most people are taught history, is you memorize these events and these people and what they did and these dates. And I try to be like the antithesis of that. And I always tell my kids, listen, there's no reason on the planet you need to memorize 100 dates. I can teach you how to do that. It's not hard to work how to memorize things. We're going to figure out how. I tell them we're going to learn life skills, because that's what history is. History is nothing but people screwing up and succeeding, and usually at the same time. And so it's like, okay, we're not going to learn this date and this person. We're going to learn what decision did they make, how did it affect people. and why do you think they did it? And we try to apply that to our own lives. That way, people try to lie to you, you're gonna know if they're full of shit or not. And if you're trying to analyze yourself, you're gonna say, well, this person did this, so maybe we talked about that. Maybe I should go down this path. Or one of my favorite lessons is we talk about the Revolutionary War, which is important in American history. But why would that be important to a teenage kid? Well, because if you look at the American Revolution, you can see how a bad relationship happens and learn why you should leave someone in a bad relationship for being too clingy or violent or not respecting what you say or anything like that.
And that's such a cool way to approach learning in general, is because I think as humans, we're hardwired to be able to want to relate, right? And so when you can make something seem more relevant, it's a lot easier to consume and to understand, right? So even like what you're saying, even from like the perspective of a 15, 16-year-old kid, trying to paint that picture of how this can be relevant and how you could possibly relate to that person. I always think of it too, like in terms of painting it. It's like history can be, you can paint it in such like a dry terms, or you can really paint any subject in very dry, like, I don't know, very like, this is the way it was in facts, which is unfortunate because most things have such really cool human narratives around them. Like I think of like, for me, I think of like, Albert Einstein, like this mythical figure of like scientific, understanding of the world. Like his life story is such a cool narrative that you could weave that into what he provided to the actual field of science, but it's so much more engaging, right? Because it's like an actual human being that had these ups and downs and these like triumphs and like, I remember when I read his biography by Walter Isaacson, and like the thing that I loved about his biography was like a lot of the papers that he wrote that earned him Nobel Prizes, he did as like a side hustle, right? And that for me, that was like super inspiring as like a 23-year-old kid working a day job that I didn't really love, but having these other passions. It was like, oh, no worries, because Albert Einstein, like one of the greatest scientists in history, literally like from in his early 20s, worked a job he hated, and then in the evenings hustled his butt off on his passion. And that's how he kind of like made his career possible, made a name for himself. But there are things like that we just do a poor job, I think, of working that into the dry substance of what we're trying to teach people.
Yeah, it's like we learn about, I just did a unit about Alexander the Great. And, I taught all about him, but I had the kids write down at the top of their notes, what does it mean to be great? What are some definitions for why he might be great? Is that really great?
That's cool, man.
So we talk quite a bit about like just being a good person.
I love that.
So, to dad stuff,
man. I could just rant forever about all kinds of stuff. But yeah, so I thought what would be fun to talk about for this episode, and we don't have to go, feel free to be as candid or not as you'd want to in this conversation. And I'll be happy to start, like you said. But I thought what would be great to talk about first is, or for this episode, would be kind of like our origin stories of becoming dads. Like,
love it.
Like I really like superheroes. I think it's kind of this cool idea of like mythologizing, how you got to be where you got to be. Even if for nobody else, it's, for yourself. It's kind of like a story you tell yourself that in some way, shape, or form empowers you in a good way. So, you want me to go, or you want to go?
I'll let you go first, just because mine's going to take a minute.
Okay. Yeah. I'll try to make mine as succinct.
I'm going to try to be very honest about mine.
I'm going to be as succinct as possible. Mine's straightforward, and is like with many things, it doesn't bear, and many things in my life, I really don't have much witness to bear in a lot of things. Like I've always just kind of followed the very standard typical path. And I think part of that's good, and part of it is just the fact that I'm that stubborn of a human being, where it's like once I've planted my flag in the ground, it's like it makes me hold on to that flag harder the more people try to push me off of it, which is probably a curse at times but a blessing at others. So I guess I should start with, I think fatherhood was always something I knew was going to be in my future. And I don't know if that's because of how my family talked about it, or my parents talked about it, or how they spoke to us about our future, if that's why I kind of assumed that. But it's just not something there was never a point in my adolescence or my early adult years where I thought, I don't think kids are part of this. And because of that, a lot of the decisions I made, some way, shape, or form, kind of are factoring in that thought process of, I'm going to be a dad at some point. And I guess most important of that is selecting a partner, right? Like, if evaluating who you are dating and their ability to be that long-term partner for that very important project that you're going to undertake in raising little humans. And lucky for me, I found that person very early on, probably because of that mindset that I kind of took in from a very young age to those relationships. Where was I going with that? So that being said, at some point, probably, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, I kind of knew that, like, I wanted to do the dad thing young. So I respect, like, everyone's decisions about timing. To me, though, it seems like there's kind of two paths you can follow when it comes to this sort of thing. You can delay it until like your 30s, and you can kind of put yourself on more firm ground. Usually, you're more advanced in your career, you're making more money. You gave yourself 10 years to experience the world, travel, spend your money on things you were interested and passionate about. Maybe you find your partner before those years. Maybe you find your partner in those years or at the end of them. But usually you have your kids a little later, and you're an older parent, right? You're like having your kids and you're getting them off to college into your, late 40s, early 50s.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's what my sister did. It was just her and her husband dated for a very long time before they even got married.
And like, that's like totally cool. And I guess early on, I kind of saw, like, I saw the two paths and weighed the options, and Kelsey kind of shared that. We kind of, like, because we got together so young, that was like an ongoing conversation for a lot of our, like, relationship, is like, when do we think we want to have kids? Do we want to be older parents or younger parents? And we kind of both came to the conclusion that we'd rather do it while we're young and while we have a lot of energy and we want to do things. And part of that was we felt like that would give us the best chance at being very engaged and present parents. And then the flip side is kind of selfish, where it was like, oh, well, if we have kids when we're like in our early 20s, by the time we're like 40, they'll be well on the way out of their house. And we still got like 20, 30 more years of like really good, healthy, active.
Nothing wrong with that either.
Yeah. So that was kind of like two coins, right? So that was our decision. But the whole, like, having kids, it was very spontaneous. I was 22, 23. We just finished college, or I just finished college. Kelsey was working. I was working at the hospital, and was trying to run the gym and kind of doing that on this, 40, 50 hours a week, and then doing the Scribe job for another 30 or 40 hours. It was kind of like the Scribe job was kind of bootstrapping the gym. And then we decided it was kind of very like, oh, well, I guess we'll start trying, or we'll just stop not trying to have kids. Yeah. And it took us almost it felt like a year to, like, and I don't really know, like, if that's normal, especially for, couples that have been not trying for a really long time. It, just takes a while for things to, like, biologically work themselves out.
It took a long time for us to have our second daughter.
Yeah. So, and I don't, maybe that's
for a long time.
And maybe other people have different experience, but we were it took us so long that we were kind of at a point where we were a little frustrated because we figured we're young, we're healthy, we don't have anything presumably wrong with us. Everyone always treats it like if you're a little bit unsafe in your sex life, you're going to have a kid, right? Like, so that was kind of like this mythologized idea about it. But
that's like, not to interrupt, it just
no,
reminds me of like, we tried for a long time to have our second daughter, and actually the night before my wife found out she was pregnant, we decided to stop for a while because it had taken a long time and we were both just pretty frustrated. Like you said, we were upset, and we had a great talk and just prayed a lot with each other. And we were just like, it's okay. We're just going to take some time before we try again. The next day, my wife fell off. Then she took her pregnancy test and she took 6 more and they all said pregnant.
That's awesome. It's always when you stop watching the water boil, it finally boils.
It's a great analogy.
That was like the same. Like that was kind of the same with us. But what's interesting for me as a kid who grew up in a fairly conservative household with fairly conservative parents, that just idea of like any kind of scrupulous sexual activity was going to automatically lead to a baby. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so like that, just being completely thrown off by the fact that we were not being safe and, quote unquote safe. And like, we're still struggling to have it, to get pregnant. And kind of then as we're like learning more about the fertility aspect and the opportunity to actually get pregnant and how there actually is, it's a little bit more difficult than what your sexual education classes or your parents portray it to be. But anyways, like 8-9 months into that thing, boom, we find out we're pregnant. So it was something we discussed a lot, something we both really wanted. But the exact timing was almost very unexpected and sort of spontaneous in how we decided to finally take that step to become parents. And then it was like a crazy series of life events. Kelsey found out she was pregnant. I got laid off from the hospital. It was like, oh no, this is horrible, because like the gym was providing some income, but not enough for myself or enough to have Kelsey stay at home. And so it was like this mad scramble to like, okay, I need
That's like earth-shattering.
Yeah, it was like this, like, oh my God, we got this kid. Lucky for me though, and my mom will laugh if she ever hears this, but because I shit on my decision to go to college all the time because of the financial investment, the financial toll it's placed on us in our early, adult years. But lucky for me, I had that college degree as almost like a backstop in that situation, because having that degree allowed us to kind of at that moment step back and be like, okay, we're gonna have a baby. Maybe we push pause on some of Steven's entrepreneurial pursuits and passions in exchange for a far greater passion, that is, having a family and being a provider and that sort of thing. And we'll go leverage my degree that I spent all this time and money getting to get a more stable, secure job that would allow Kelsey to stay home, provide health insurance, all that good stuff. And, the rest is kind of like history. Then after that, the second one came along, and that one was like, we thought about a second one, and it was like, bang, there he was here. And, it's been one of those things that like, I can't say that I totally empathize with people who say they don't want kids, because from my viewpoint, it's just one of the most, one of the most awe-inspiring, gratifying adventures that I've been a part of. And I think it's going to be the greatest one I'm a part of in my lifetime. But I respect people who do that, who decide not to, or think they don't want to. I totally respect it. But I would be disingenuous if I said that I totally understand it, or I would be disingenuous if I said I don't think you're missing out on anything, because I think in my experience, you would be,
Yeah, we have a married couple that we're friends with, and they don't have any kids, but they're great with our kids. And Gabby is always trying to convince them to get pregnant, and it's mostly the husband in that situation. He wants kids. He's just like, we have to make sure we're like financially in the right spot, and that's one of those things. Like, I'm always just like, totally, that's legit.
Oh,
Kids,
it is.
kids
It
are very
is.
expensive, and if you're not in that situation, it's a lot harder. I wouldn't say it's irresponsible, because I don't think it is irresponsible. It's just a lot harder.
Yeah, and to me, that's where the whole it all comes down to the mindset.
Planning it out.
It comes down to like the mindset that you have around it, right? If you are bought in 100% to the idea of having kids, and your finances aren't ideally where you want them to be, and I'm not certain that anybody who's actually become a parent can say there's probably but if you have a mindset of like, this is what I wanted and this is what I chose to do, knowing full well all the difficulties that were going to be a part of it, it's going to be a positive experience.
Yeah.
My feeling is a lot of people jump into parenthood without having any real meaningful conversations or thoughts around what the heck does it mean? What the heck does that mean or look like? Or what are the sucky parts of it? Because that's like kind of like a life philosophy for me. Is like, everything is going to have some amount of suck. And so you have to make a conscious decision that like, you're going to accept and embrace the suck, and you're going to choose to focus on the positive, right? That's just the nature of life. There are parts of your job that you're going to hate. There are parts that are awesome, and you have to make the conscious decision to just focus on the awesome parts. And if that
job is work.
Yeah, it's like, and if you don't have that mindset, if that's not your mindset, and you don't have that, you don't completely understand everything you're signing up for, I think that's where you end up with people kind of resentful maybe of that role, resentful of the limitations. Because no joke, having kids does put limitations on you. Like
it's not always the most fun thing on the planet. No,
it's not, and it restricts.
There are days in which it's not fun at all.
I can't just decide, oh, I want to make movies for a living. I'm going to go get a job at a production company and just make movies. Like, I could do that, but there's, now that I have kids and I have wives and I've made commitments to things, now I am more limited. And some people would view that as like a negative thing. It's not a negative thing. It's just a reality. And so you need to be aware of that reality and be okay with it before you sign the dotted line. And then after the fact, you're like, oh, now I can't travel. And even if I want to like go to the store, I've got to go through like 10 logistical nightmares to figure out who's going to watch my kid. And you know what I mean? It's like, that's, I think, where the whole, like, the parenting journey can go very far askew to me, is like, and that's like, I was talking to you about your buddy in another episode about how thoughtful he's being around where his mindset is and attitude is towards that stuff. It's like, if your attitude and mindset is not 100% there yet, then yeah, you're probably better off letting it go, but once your mindset shifts again, and it could in 10 or 20 years or whatever that timeline is for you, go for it. Right. Like it's just being aware of where you are at.
Yeah. And his is all about, he's a very ambitious young man, and he I want to focus on this. I have a job to do, and I want to do it well. And I don't want to be bad at being a dad.
And that's and that's a reality, right? Because the reality of the nature is like, it's going to demand time. It is. And like, I think that we're bad at that as human beings, or maybe even just as a society. We're really bad at holding these two things in our head that contradict at the same time, right? Like, it's like, well, being a parent is obviously really good. Being excelling professionally is obviously really good. And then it's like, yeah, but then there's a balancing there, and you have to be willing to admit to yourself whether or not you're really willing to give up some of this for that. And I think some people are not, they can't be honest enough with themselves to say like, yeah, I would probably like shortchange dad being a father right now for succeeding professionally. Yeah. And that's purely from a standpoint of like, they feel like that reflects poorly on them. Yeah. And it doesn't reflect poorly on you. That's totally you being honest, and that's a good thing, so that you don't end up in a decision, or you don't end up in a situation where you feel compromised, your kid feels compromised, everyone feels like they are someplace they didn't agree to be, and everyone's resentful and angry and upset. And 20 years down the road, everyone's bitter about it, you know?
It's that inability to flex the empathy muscle.
Yeah, totally. I totally get that.
I like, you use thoughtful to describe my buddy. I like how describing your story, how thoughtful you were.
And we're lucky. I think Kelsey and I it's hard for me sometimes to speak about, because we're not perfect, and we, you know, what our relationship looked like when we were 15 and 17 versus what it looked like when we were 18 and 21 living in our first apartment together. There was so much dysfunction and struggles with communication and things we worked through. I think that's part of a relationship. But it's also been a blessing, because we just had so much time together before it was really even, it was before it was even like logically a good decision to start really thinking about having kids. Like, say you're, 23. We had already been together for, at that point it would have been 8 years or something like that, right? Yeah. 8 years of conversations about kids and adulthood, and like, and that's purely because it just like, we couldn't have kids when we were 17 years old. That didn't make any sense. But we could have lots of conversations about what we thought that would look like when we're older. Yeah. And a lot of people aren't as lucky in that area of their relationship. They don't find their partner till they're further on, and then they feel like the pressure's there to like, yeah, I mean, that's, so it's sometimes I don't want to paint like it's this easy thing to do. Like, I think we just got lucky in that sense, and found a way to kind of navigate. Cause like the 27-year-old Stevan compared to 15-year-old Stevan is a like vastly different person. And we've been lucky enough to figure a way how to navigate each of us changing so much over the years. But we did get lucky, because we basically got 9-8 solid years of purely just hypothetical discussions and being able to be very thoughtful about these things before they actually were like on top of us to make the decision,
It's by far one of my favorite parts of being married is changing together and realizing there's some days where I hold her up, and there's some days where she holds me up, and marriage is like that sometimes. But as far as like what you talk about, the changing and adapting and talking over time, and realize that in reality, most of the time you're holding each other up. Oh, yeah. And that's something I say to my wife all the time, is like, we just got to hold each other up right now.
And I think that comes back to that mindset. Like, to me, mindset dictates a lot of things in your life. And so like I was saying, that mindset towards having kids, if you're 100% all in and there's no question about your desire for to have children, you're going to be fine. Like, whatever your circumstances and situations, it's going to be fine. You're going to get through it, because in your world, there's no other option. Yeah. You're already, and so like a lot of times I feel like that with my marriage is like, divorce, opting out, like that's not even there. So the only move forward here is for us to figure this out, right? Is to work together and talk through this and and learn how to adjust and change, because I'm not going anywhere, and I'm pretty confident that she has that same mindset. It's like, I'm also not going anywhere. So we're just kind of stuck with each other. So better we figure it out than it not be fun. Right. And, and that's probably the issue. Like, I think sometimes with relationships is like, I'm here until that person like does something that I don't really like.
Yeah.
Right. And so if that's your mindset, then it could be very easily, when your partner's attitude or politics or passions or hobbies shift, you're like, well, that doesn't really jive anymore. So I'm hitting the road here, you know?
That's one of those things that, like, because we have that mindset too. I couldn't imagine we've talked about this openly. I can't imagine any scenario or really any situation in which I would probably leave my wife, and she said the same thing. And we've been through so much in the amount of time we've been together. We just feel like kind of like we have an edge as far as like the trials that we've had to overcome. And it really, how I want to put that.
No, it's such an important thing, because I think that's the basis for like really strong relationships, is shared experiences, right? Like,
Yeah. And we know, because we've had to overcome so much, that when bad things happen, well, this sucks, but we've been in tougher times than this.
yeah, by comparison, it's like, yeah, we can do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally agree. I don't want to take up though all the time talking about Steven's dad story and marriage. So let's talk a little bit about how Jaxon ended up becoming a dad.
Let's. So I came about it in a very different way, and I do want to say, because I've never really talked about it with, like, I've talked about it with like family and a couple close friends, but like haven't really gone out and shared it very much. So I want to make sure I'm going to try very hard to be honest. But also my wife would agree with this, is sometimes I have a tendency to be incredibly harsh on myself, like way overly harsh than I need to be. So I'm going to try to be fair to me, but I'm also going to try to be as honest as possible. So whenever, and I've talked a little bit about it in high school, I had a lot of guidance that I didn't listen to ever. And I was just kind of,
Jaxon.
I know, dude, it's like my dad's personal like motto. That's his family crest. God damn it, Jaxon. I don't think I've ever heard my dad cuss. So in high school I was just kind of there. I was smart enough to where, like, if I had a little bit of discipline, I could have done better. But I just, there's a laziness and there was some weak mentality there, and a lot of insecurities towards myself, not a lot of self-respect for myself. And that really carried over into college, because now I was like, I have freedom. I can do whatever I want. And, just really did not take college seriously at all for that, first year and a half. I just was there to hang out and party, and, my classes sucked, my grades sucked, and didn't treat myself well, didn't treat other people well, and knew that that's what was happening. Was very aware of it, but did not want to admit it. So, beginning of my sophomore year, I had a one-night stand with a girl, and a few weeks later, she sends me a text message, and about the scariest text message a college-age guy can get. She doesn't even send a word. She sends a positive birth control test. Yeah, that's how I woke up one morning, and so I kind of, I freaked out. and talk to her and all that stuff. And it was a lot of different things happened about trying to figure out what was happening and all that stuff. And there was some confusion about whether I was the biological dad or not. So I kind of took the irresponsible route of, I was like, well, I'll take a paternity test. And she was kind of like, no, I don't want to do that. I think it's you. And I kind of took the irresponsible route of, well, if we're not going to take a paternity test, I don't see how this is my problem.
Well, I
Which
don't
was,
necessarily know if that's irresponsible as so much of
well,
it is objectively practical.
well,
If there's concerns that there's more than one candidate in the running, we should probably
yeah,
figure this out.
I say that with the caveat that I was very okay with that. Like with the idea.
You're saying you're okay with the idea of just being like, well, if there's no paternity test, then
Yeah, yeah.
good luck.
I did not press the issue very hard. I kind of said, hey, if we do this, I'm in. But if not, then I don't want to be a part of that. It's not exactly fair. And so I kind of went on with that notion for about 6 or 7 months, and knowing that this girl was pregnant, not 100% certain if it was mine, but like deep down, like it was very, very depressing because I kind of knew, and finally kind of just broke down and talked to my parents about it. And, they were great and very supportive and got a paternity test. And the funny thing about paternity tests is they don't tell you like yes or no, like you're the father, you're not the father. They tell you like your percentage chance. Mine was at 99. And I kind of felt like in Dumb and Dumber, I saw the 1%. And I was like, so you're telling me there's a chance. But
No, you mean 99% you're not?
no, 99% I was.
Oh.
But, and, the idea, there was never any point in which my oldest daughter, where her biological mother and I were ever going to be in a relationship. That was something that neither of us was interested in whatsoever. And there was a lot of hostility between her and I. Some of it was me growing up, and some of it was she's a person with a lot of poison in her water, so to say. Um, just lots of things, clouding the judgment there. And so, but Hayden was born, and happiest day ever. I remember just holding her, and she went up to my forearm, went a little past my wrist, and I melted because she had my eyes. And I had always said, and I had always said I want a kid. I don't want them to be anything like me. I just want them to have my eyes. That's it. And I don't know. It was very scary for me because I had always kind of talked about. I think I would openly say I'd like to be a dad someday, but I'm sure I'd be a terrible dad, and I'm sure I'd be a terrible husband. And a lot of that was my own insecurities and my own self-doubts, and that.
It's funny how those stories we tell ourselves,
Yeah.
they really do come to life. And I think so, I think unfortunately that's a superpower I think we a lot of times use negatively against ourselves. When
I think so.
you know what I mean? When we could put that to use in a positive way, even if like to your point, like obviously those things you were telling yourself about your abilities as being your ability to be a husband or father were complete lies, right? But like those are the power of words that we could use for good, even if maybe you weren't in the best place be a good father,
Yeah.
you could tell yourself you are going to be a good father, and all of a sudden that becomes your truth, right? That becomes a positive instead of a negative.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it was I knew that I wasn't being the best person I could be. I knew I wasn't treating myself with or other people with respect. And I had a lot of addictions at the time that I was nowhere near confronting. And um, it was, so I think that was a lot of it
So
was me.
what moment, like, because like you were saying, that's a very, I don't know. I mean, you can look at it two ways. That's either a very cliche way to come to parenthood,
Yeah.
or you can look at it as a very unconventional way, right? So,
I,
I
I
guess
always
so.
felt I always
But
felt like it was unconventional. Now I'm starting to realize it's more common than not.
I don't know if it's common, but I think you
Yeah.
could, like, whether how however way you want to make yourself feel about it, you could make that's probably a very troped up way, in culture for people
Yeah.
to portray, how somebody becomes a dad. I think though what's rare, probably more rare or unconventional in your case, is the fact that it went to the positive, right? Like it,
Yeah.
and that's what I was going to ask you, is like, because you were kind of, I'm not saying you were reluctantly pulled to it, but I'm saying you were kind of reactively drawn into it. Like it was
Oh,
kind of like,
absolutely.
you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I wonder, because I think the hard thing for a lot of people in those situations is to come out of that reactiveness and realize that whether or not this was something that we logically planned through and thought out, it's happening.
Yeah.
And so I've got to shut that reactivity off and and buy in here, because there's somebody that needs me, is going to need me.
Yeah.
And that seems to be where the a lot of the other situations go negative, is because that father or that dad can never figure out how to shut that off. And so
Yeah.
he ends up just continuing to, like, try to push the situation away and resist against it. And then he ends up just actually damaging the one person that really had nothing to do with the situation or any say in it, which is the kid,
Yeah.
So at what moment for you, at what moment was that switch, right? Like, was it when there was 99% certainty it was yours, or was it when she was finally there? Was it holding her for the first time?
I think once I realized I was going to be a dad, I grew up in like you, a pretty conservative household. And, immediately, and even talking to my parents, I was like, okay, well, I'm in this now. And so I'm going to be a part of this. Um, and I didn't know what role, like how into it I would be, but I was like, I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be an active presence, however I can be. And
Where do you think that came from? You think that came from your own parents, or
I
your
think so.
childhood?
Yeah, I think so. I think both my folks are very, there's not a ton of gray with either of them. It's, this is how to be good, and I think I think I just knew, and part of it's part of the reason I also decided to finally talk to them about it was I was literally like having nightmares where I was meeting my daughter when I was 45, and she was a mess, like
Yeah,
beyond.
that's a real thing. Like, that's a real, like, that's not only a fear for your own child's well-being, but it's existential, right? Because your
Yeah.
kids are in some ways your legacy. So
Yeah.
it's almost like an existential threat that you're experiencing to yourself. It's like, oh my gosh, is this what I'm going to leave for
And
the
that was the
world?
question. I was like, am I okay with that? And I was like, well, I'm not going to talk. And like, I was literally arguing with myself in my mind. I was like, are you okay with that? And I was like, I'm not going to talk about it. And I was trying to be like, this isn't my fault. I, denying that responsibility. But once I finally was like, you know what, I'm not okay with that, then I think that switch kind of happened. I was like, well, I'll be there. and I was lucky. I have fantastic parents, and I remember having the conversation with my mom. I was like, you know what? I'll drop out of school for a few years and get a full time job and get enough money to get a house, and then I'll go back to school and get my degree. And my mom was like, no. She goes, you'll come live with us, and you'll finish your degree, and that will be your job, and then we can figure out the rest of it.
That's awesome, man. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one. I think that's one. I just, I clap you up from the sense of like that soberness to be like, this is my responsibility, right? And if nothing else, I'm going to own up to that.
Yeah,
that sense of duty, I guess, is what that is. It comes from this sense of duty that you did something or you were involved in a situation, and so you have an obligation.
Yeah. And
some people, though, that's great. I mean, some people they can override that. They just like, no.
I was trying as hard as I could to override that for a while there. But I just was like, okay, I'm not okay with that situation, so I have to do something about it. So maybe that's that proactiveness you were talking about.
And even better even better that your parents were that supportive. My mom used to always give me and my brother shit because she was always like in high school. She was always like, if you get a girl knocked up with a baby, you are dropping out of high school and I'm putting your ass in Tulsa welding school and you're gonna work for a living and you're gonna take care of that baby. You know what I mean? That was always her big threat. She was like, you're gonna become a welder and you're gonna work your ass off and you're gonna make
welders make great money.
I know that was her point. That was always her point. She's like, you're gonna make plenty of money, but you're gonna work a lot and you're gonna take care of that baby. So I don't know if that's really what she would have done. She probably would have been more like what your parents.
Good for your mom.
But she probably would have been more reasonable like your parent was, which is like, this is not the end of your future. You can, we're gonna figure this out together. I feel for people. I do feel for people that aren't as fortunate, to have that kind of support system.
It's one of those things I think about that all the time when we talk about single moms and single dads about, man, I was lucky. Not only did I have really great parents, but I found my partner, I found Gabby and we started a relationship about a year or so after Hayden was born. And, that's one of the things I'm most thankful for is one, I kind of have a different perspective on my relationship with my parents. And because in all honesty, for that first year, they were doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And, I was there and I was present and I was trying to do everything I could. But at times, and some of this was in my own mind, but at times I kind of felt like I'm a very responsible big brother. And I'm sure that wasn't entirely true, but that was kind of the feeling at the time. But the big thing I'm thankful for is like, I've gotten to see my wife with my daughter, and she, over time, we've had issues with Hayden's biological mother to where she's signed over her rights and doesn't have any contact anymore. And that paved the way for Gabby to adopt Hayden. And that's one of the most magical things I've ever seen. And I think it's probably the reason I never will leave my wife, not only for the fact that I love her more than anything, but she had no obligation to love that kid. And she did, to the point where she was like, I will drop everything and be that child's mother, even though that means having to deal with, a man who still was very much growing up at the time and was growing up much faster, but also was a little late to the party there. But, and also having to deal with, the issues of, kind of an unstable third party there.
Yeah, man, that's no joke, man. That's real adult shit, right? I mean, and dealing with it at young adult years with little adult experience.
She was younger than I. I was 20 when I found out. It was my 20th birthday when I found out I was going to be a dad. And I think Gabby was 20 when we first started dating. And she was just like, I'm in. This is what I'm here to do.
That's awesome, man. I think the whole experience between you and your daughter's biological mother illustrates, like, as much as, like, you started your story off by saying sometimes you're hard on yourself. The complete contrast in reaction to that situation just illustrates why you should not be that hard on yourself, because that you did the hard thing, you did the hard stuff. Obviously we all wish we could do it with more grace, but the fact that you do get it done, I mean, you know what I mean? Who cares how you get on base as long as you get on base, right? And that's like,
I'm an Oakland A's fan. That's our mom.
Yeah, I mean, you think whatever you want of it, right? Like our stories are very contrast a lot in that way, but like, as long as like, who cares how you come to fatherhood, as long as once you come to it, you own up to that duty and that responsibility.
Exactly.
A lot of people, for example, like what you guys have experienced on the other side of your daughter, it's, they just override that sense of duty, and it's there. I mean, know that sense is there, but for whatever reason, they have come to a place where they're able to ignore it and shove it away and shove it down. And that's unfortunate.
I don't know. For me, it was the conduit, and I'm eternally thankful it happened like that. And I regret parts of it. I regret that because it did put a huge strain on my parents, and it hurt them in several ways. And there's been times where it's hurt me, and it's hurt my wife, especially having to deal with all that chaos. But at the same time, I know for a fact I wouldn't have grown up very quickly without that. And, I would not have met my wife.
Yeah. Hindsight's 2020. And the fact of the matter is it is what it is. Schrodinger's cat, right? The box has been opened. You'll never know the other way. Like you can go back and think about it. And what if we had done this, or I had done this differently, but it's like, this is it, right? That's your origin story. And for everything you feel it isn't, there are a lot of things that it is, right? And
I wouldn't be anywhere close to the person I am today without the birth of my first daughter. And so I'll always be grateful for that. And she is I tell her all the time, I was like, you're my best friend, right? She's like, yeah.
I have to say though, I kind of feel like you went second just so you could upstage me, because your story is way more full of triumphs. It's way more a story of overcoming adversity and succeeding. And this is my problem. Everybody has I give my brother shit all the time because he's real, and his job is basically outreach to youth. And like we always talk about, how people have like their testimonies, about their faith and things they went through. And like, I just don't have a lot of shit to give testimony on, and it makes my world seem so whitewashed. And then you come along, you fuckers over here come along with all these like incredible, touching stories of humanity and blow me out of the water. It's like, well, yeah, Stevan, he got lucky and blah, 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 blah. But
you know what? There's something to be said for that, but there's also something to be said for the guy who plays it by the book. And I don't say that as a bad thing at all. I don't say that. That's not a slight at all.
I know.
We don't talk about that as much because it's not as dramatic.
It's not, man. I'm telling you, it's not as dramatic at all.
But it's kind of what you said. Who cares how the hell you get on base? You got on base, and you're living your best life, man.
Yeah, man, that's all that matters.
Yeah,
But but fuckers like you just gotta always put me in a
It did
corner
not feel
over
that
here.
way at the time.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah, I don't envy that, man. I don't envy that.
It's with lots of hindsight.
That's a fresh new story to me. I never heard that story, so
Yeah,
I was kind of like part of the audience there.
Yeah, I haven't talked about it very much. I talk, my family, my close friends, but I haven't, put it out there very much.
You should, man. That's a it's
we
an
are.
important, like you said, it's part of your origin story. It's an important part of who you are, and I think it's something that the more you own it, the more it will add to that sense of power, and not only that, but it'll give a lot of other people who have found themselves in similar situations, like someone to relate to. It'll give them permission to share their experience and their feelings and how they processed it. Because there's a lot of people, I think, like you said, you come from a conservative family and you find yourself in this situation that everybody warns you against ever being in. And there can be a lot of shame wrapped up in that, right? And you don't know anybody else immediately next to you who you can talk to about that, It's unique. It's just so unique, it's something only somebody who's lived that would know how to relate.
And that's one thing I would definitely talk to people about is, and I do still struggle with that guilt sometimes, even though I try to own it of, growing up with that. I mean, dude, I'm not even shitting you. When I first found out, I sent Facebook messages and called family members and apologized for any uncomfortable conversations they were going to have with their families about it. That was my reaction to being a dad. I was like,
yeah, it's like
I gotta apologize for the people who are going to be put in bad situations here. And what I would tell people is, you don't have to do that because, I love the way you put that. You got on base, and sometimes it's not in the conventional setting, but it's less about the outcome and more about the process.
Yeah, and I always say that, like, to people whenever so it's so different too. Like, for the first time we told my grandmother, she's from Honduras, my mom's mom, that we were pregnant. Her first reaction was, why would you do that? Because in their culture, it's just having a kid is such a burden, right? It's such it's a hard thing. It's already hard enough to provide for yourself. Now you got to provide for something that can't provide for it, and
they have the right attitude.
Yeah, I know. And it always makes me laugh because I always tell people whenever they find themselves in that situation, it's like regardless of the circumstances that surround it, it's a blessing, right? It truly is a blessing. Even if it isn't ideal, isn't even what you thought it was, it's like one of the very first commandments that God gives is like, go forth and prosper. And that it is literally like one of the greatest things is to be able to bring another life into the world. From a dad perspective, we're more at the peripheral at the beginning there, but to just be a part of that and have that sense of legacy that you're going to leave behind is awesome. And so it's something to be celebrated. We should never make people feel like it's something to feel shame about.
No, and it really does, it's one of those opportunities, I like to think about, okay, what's my perspective here and what's a different perspective I could have? And looking at that situation, my perspective is, one, appreciating my parents so much more, but, just the overwhelming love and gratitude I have, with my wife, with my partner there, because of she literally saw me grow up, and that was a big part of it. And our daughter was a big reason we came together and succeeded. So
that's awesome, man.
I'm always grateful for that. I'm always grateful that I have that perspective.
Well, I love you. I love your origin story, man.
I say that as awesome. My wife is dancing in front of me and trying to make me laugh.
Well, we have been on here for a while, so in that sense, let's go ahead and let's wrap it up. We don't have to go through any of those other topics. We can circle back.
It's all right. Yeah.
Where can people find us? Let's just wrap up and do our extra. Jaxon, where should people, if people got a similar story to jumping into this fatherhood as you and they want to talk about it, where can they get you at?
I would love nothing more than that. You always just find me on Facebook, Jaxon Roberts, or just send me an email, jacksonroberts@gus.pittstate.edu. Go Gorillas.
Go Gorillas. And then for me, if you want to talk to the guy who played it by the book, which not that exciting, you can find me on.
Not a bad thing.
You can find me.
Shame on yourself. Shame on yourself.
You can find me on Instagram, Stevan.freeborn. That's just a good central place. There's obviously, you can find my email there, my website, all that good stuff. But yeah, we'd be happy to.
Mindfulness and thoughtfulness is not a bad thing, Mr.
Most of the time, it is
celebrate that.
But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. I know Jaxon feels the same way. We'd love to hear any feedback. If there's anybody who has suggestions for topics that want us to talk about, if you want to be a guest and come on and talk with us, that's more than encouraged.
Answer emails on one of the shows.
Yeah, let's do it. Other than that, though, I think the one thing we could ask if you are listening is just if you're a dad, share this with another dad. If you know someone who's a dad, share that this with them. Like Jaxon said, it is a podcast made by dads. We don't necessarily mean it to be exclusively for dads, but we know a lot of the things we talk about will resonate with people who find themselves in that role. So that would be our one ask, I think.
Celebrate that role.
Yeah.
Celebrate it every day.
Here. All right, man. Good talk. I appreciate it.
Awesome.